Hi, welcome to Stories of Art. My name is Karel Huidekoper and today I'd like to tell you a story about this lovely painting by Frans Hals. It's in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam and was made in 1622. Now, it's a lovely double portrait that is a good opportunity for me to tell you the sort of small details that you can find in a painting like this that tell you more about the couple you see here. But let me get out of the way so I can get started with the story. The people we see here in this painting are Massa and Beatrix van der Laen. They had gotten married. They were both prominent citizens of the city of Haarlem, one of the wealthy cities in Holland, the more populous area of the Netherlands. He was a rich merchant. She was the daughter of one of the mayors of the city. Now, as I said, they came from Haarlem. And Haarlem had been a rich city for ages. Had only just been sort of surpassed by Amsterdam, which was more of a boomtown that had only come to prominence in the past few decades. But Haarlem already had a painterly tradition for years and years, and Frans Hals was the most talented of the portrait painters of his generation. He was in fact so famous at making these portraits that people came from all kinds of different cities to be portrayed by him, which was unusual. Usually painters would go to where the work was. But Frans Hals didn't like to travel, so you had to come to him. In this case, nobody had to travel because, well, these two people lived in Haarlem as well. And they were portrayed for the occasion of their wedding. But the area we can see them in is not Haarlem. Haarlem is a city right next to the dunes, the coastline of the Netherlands. And it's a completely flat landscape, like the background, but in the background we see what you might call a love garden. It's a garden filled with, well, there's couples walking around, there's beautiful buildings, statues, and there's fountains. And the fountains are actually something that you don't find in the Netherlands, because we don't have fountains, or we didn't have any. The reason for that is that Holland is flat, and to have a fountain you need water pressure, and water pressure you get from a water reservoir somewhere higher up than your fountain. So ideally a lake in the hills around your city. We don't have that. We have dunes. There are some little ponds in there, but not big enough to have a working fountain. In fact, just a year before this painting was made, in Amsterdam, all fountains were banned. You were not even allowed to make one. Some people did, but had to do it in, well, I guess in secret, because you had to have a reservoir on the roof of your house. Only rainwater that you could catch on your roof, you could use that for your fountain, so it couldn't work all day long. But for some reason the city council decided to ban all of these fountains because it led to indecent behavior, apparently. But in this case, I would say it's a fountain in a love garden in this sort of fantasy landscape that they're in. Now, when we move towards the couple themselves, one of the things that, of course, always is noticeable in all these paintings by Frans Hals is his brushwork. It's this very fast, it's very loose sort of brushwork, and it even looks as if you look at such a lace cuff like this one, as if he's just painted it with these fast strokes, as if he'd done it in a couple of minutes. Actually, maybe he did, I don't know. What they're wearing, actually, they're wearing black. Today we might expect a bride to wear white, but that wasn't the fashion yet. That came into play only in the 19th century. Now, she's wearing her Sunday best, you might say. Her most festive clothing and her most expensive clothing, because all the fabrics you see are massively expensive, and apparently black cloth was more expensive than any other. And what she's wearing around her neck is particularly expensive. That's a millstone collar. And millstone collars are, as I said, very, very expensive, because they're made up of a very long stretch of very fine linen. Actually, 30 meters of fine linen goes into one of these millstone collars. You had to fold them and tie them in every time you wore them, which is not something you can do by yourself. You needed 2 or 3 people to do that. So you would only wear that for something very, very festive, and because it's expensive, it's a lot of work to do. And of course they get dirty. And in Haarlem they were actually very proud of the water around the city that came from the dunes, and that was very clear water, and Haarlem was famous for its industry of cleaning these millstone collars, not just for the city itself, but for people from all around. And I have a painting here by Jacob van Ruysdael where you can actually see these long strips outside in a garden next to a house. The white strip you see there is not actually the millstone collar. It would be kind of strange to wash one of these strips of linen and then just putting them on the ground. No, there's sheets there, and on top of them would be the white linen of the collars. You can also see that she is leaning on her new husband. She has her hand sort of in between them. It's her right hand, and on her right index finger there's a ring. Now that is kind of telling, because that's probably her wedding ring. We don't know that much about the way people got married, because there were no standardized traditions as we have today. In fact, you didn't even have to go to a priest or a church or a judge or whatever. All you had to do is just agree to be married, and then you were. So it wasn't even recorded anywhere, unless you wanted it to be. And people would always advise to record it, to write it down, and to have witnesses. And if you didn't, you could easily get into trouble. Actually, pretty much every town in the Netherlands had a special sort of court for marriage troubles, and these marriage troubles were often deciding whether or not people were married. But one of the few traditions we think most people did was that the man would give a ring to the woman. Not so much the other way around, by the way, just the man to the woman. And he would place that ring on her right index finger. The reason for that is that there was this belief that there's a special vein that runs from your right index finger straight to the heart. So that vein was called the love vein. And for that reason, it's placed on the index finger. But that only is for the first bit of the marriage, first 6 to 8 weeks. And then the ring would move to the ring finger, which is pretty much safer. Now both of these people look pretty happy. Of course you would look happy on your wedding portrait. What you don't immediately see is that there's a pretty big age difference between the two. An age difference would be pretty normal in the Netherlands at the time. Many couples had an age difference where the man was about a decade older than the woman. But in this case, the age difference is a lot bigger. He is 24 years older than she is. And apparently they made a little joke about that. They showed in their painting a reference to that from mythology. And for that, you have to look at the tree behind them. You see, the tree behind them has plants growing all over it, which would not be unusual, of course. You could expect old trees to have ivy or something growing on them. But it's not ivy, it's vines. So, grapes, basically. And vines are not that normal in the Netherlands. You don't find them here growing wild. And cultivating wine is not something we do on a large scale here in the Netherlands. It's simply too cold. But it's a reference to a story from Roman mythology. The story of Vertumnus and Pomona. If you want to know more about that story, by the way, I made a special video about it, and there I tell you the story at length. But here I'll give you the short version. There once was a god called Vertumnus, and he was a god that dealt with seasons. And he fell in love with this female god, Pomona. She was in charge of getting fruit to grow. He tried to seduce her, tried to woo her, and she rejected him. And then he changed shape and came back and tried again. She rejected him again. He changed shape a third time and eventually a fourth time because she kept rejecting him. And of course, he had to change shape 4 times because he's a seasonal god. And the 4th time he told her a story about a tree and vines. Vines grow better when they have an old tree to climb up against. And she fell madly in love, and they lived happily ever after, eternally I suppose. their gods. It's a story about an older god, the tree, and the younger goddess climbing up against the tree and finding support in the older tree, and both would strengthen each other and both would be better off. So it's kind of fitting to find that story, a reference of that story, right behind these two lovebirds. Now this is just a short story about this painting that you can still see in the Rijksmuseum. It's there. You can see it there live, I guess. And if you like this story, then please give me a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of my videos, of course, you could consider to subscribe. When you click on that button, there appears this sort of small bell. You can hit that as well. If you do that, you get notified every time I post a new video. That's handy, isn't it? In any case, thank you for listening, and hopefully see you again.